Hi everyone. Today we are going to continue with our Wild West unit. We will continue reading A Pioneer Sampler, the daily life of a pioneer family in 1840 by Barbara Greenwood, illustrated by Heather Collins. So today as we read, our target is I can identify and understand the use of point of view in a story. So when we think about point of view, we're really asking ourselves, who is telling the story? So there are two main types of points of view that an author could use. First person point of view means that we are limited. The narrator knows and shares the thoughts of one character, usually the main character in a story. So, for example, a character would use words like I, me, we, and us as they are speaking. So, for example, it's starting to snow really fiercely, I said, would be a first person. However, we can have a third person point of view, which means that the narrator knows everything and shares the thoughts of the characters. So for example, the narrator would use he, she, or they. The snow is really starting to build up at our outside of our window, he said. Would be an example of how you might hear the point of view written for third person. So we're going to look for the text evidence. When does the author first introduce the narrator? How does the author show the point of view? And how does the narrator's point of view shape the story? So as we read our text today, we're really going to be focused on who the narrator is helping us understand the story from their perspective. Is it a first person perspective or is it a third person perspective? So I'm on page 290 in my text. For 2 days, the sun baked and dried the hay. On the third morning, the whole family turned out to rake it into windrows to make the loading the sledge easier. Up and down the fields they went, competing with one another to make straight, even rows. Thing worth doing is worth doing well, Ma always said. Several times during the morning, Willie or Sarah went back to the house to get buckets of cool water, to which Granny had added a handful of oatmeal to make a thirst-quenching drink. As Willie trudged out once more with the water buckets, he looked up at the sky. Clouds like balls of carded wool were rolling in, but they were high and white. No danger from rain there. After the noon meal, Pa walked the oxen and sledge out to the field. Pitching hay onto the sledge was hard work for Willie. His arms weren't strong enough to throw a forkful to the top of the load. More often than not, his stalks slithered off. Finally, Pa, who was on top building the load, said, "Willie, will you take charge of the oxen? Keep moving them forward as we work along this row." The afternoon dragged on. One load was safely back at the barn, with another still to come. Ma and Meg were pitching hay now, while Sarah carted water. Back at the barn, Pa and George were starting to build the haystack. So we see Willie is helping out with the oxen, and then I see that a sledge must be like a sled, that it kind of looks like there's skis on the bottom, which would help the oxen just pull it across the ground. And then there's this space where the hay can be placed so that it can be carried to the barn. Hours after hours, Willie inched the oxen along the rows, watching out for stones and roots and stumps. Every now and then he scanned the sky. The woolly clouds bunched and drifted into fantastic shapes, and Willie's mind drifted with them. A bear and her cub lumbered across the sky. A dainty pony skipped by, then a fat fish blowing bubbles, a gray whale. Gray? Ma, look! Rain clouds! Ma took one quick look at the sky and said, "Get those oxen moving, Willie. We've got to get this load under cover." "Hey, yep!" Willie shouted, and the oxen started a steady plod. Low clouds scuttled in, darker with each second. Ma and Meg frantically raked windrows into small haycocks. In piles, at least the bottommost stalks would stay dry. Willie concentrated on the sledge. "Gee, Buck, gee, Bright!" He shouted to steer the oxen around roots and stumps. As the sky grew darker, he prodded the animals with the goad. "Move, move!" he urged them. The oxen blew through their nostrils and plodded steadily ahead. "Never was such a stubborn beast as an ox," his father always said. Willie could see Pa and George beside the barn. They swung their arms in rhythm, oblivious to everything but the orderly layering of the haystack. Then he felt a drop of water. "Pa!" he screeched. "Rain! Rain!" The sudden noise started Bright off at a trot, and his partner snorting behind him. Pa and George wrenched open the big barn doors, and just as the cloud burst, the sledge skidded under cover. "Good work, Willie," Pa said, and they all crowded into the barn. "You saved that load. You've got a real farmer's eye for weather." Ooh, and if I look at this picture down below, I see that they have a big barn that's built out of timber. And so they're hoping to get this sledge of hay into the barn. Because what would be the problem if the hay gets wet? Willie glowed with pride. For the next few days, as he worked, he pictured over and over his mad dash for the barn until it grew into a story of heroic proportions. When Uncle Jacob Burkholder came over to show Pa how to thatch a waterproof roof for their haystack, Willie regaled him with the whole tale. "Well, now, that's quite a feat. Moving cattle beasts along like that? Mind you, nothing like a drop of rain to get a man moving." Uncle Jacob laughed as he wove the last straw into the roof. "Now, I remember when I was a young'un, no older'n you, and I saw a dilly of a storm headin' up. My brother and I were running around fastening shutters and bolting doors when we heard a tarnation big racket headed up our way. Up our lane come a farm rig, horses running like Jehu, all wide-eyed and foaming at the mouth, wagon bouncing along like a pea on a hot skillet. "Run away," my brother shouts. "Run away," my brother shouts. Then we hear the driver screaming, "Open the doors! Open the doors!" We jumped pretty smart, I can tell you. Swung open those big barn doors. He drove the whole rig in just seconds before a great crack of thunder. And did those clouds pour rain. I looked in the wagon and seized 300 weight of flour in linen sacks. A few drops of rain and the whole lot would have caked solid. That man was never any good at reading the weather." Uncle Jacob ended scornfully. "Well, there's your stacked roof in. No fear of rain getting through that. Ma had been busy too. While she was listening to Uncle Jacob's story, she bound a handful of hay into the shape of a rooster. "Here, Willie," she said, "scoot up and stick that on top. It'll dress the stack for us." "Good idea," Uncle Jacob beamed, "and I'll show you how to rig it up as a weather vane so that you'll be warned next time a storm blows up." So if we look down below, we can see Ma's version of a rooster made out of hay. So we're going to think from this section, what are some key words that will help us know the point of view if we're talking about first person point of view, or are we talking about third person point of view? How is the narrator helping us understand?